Recording. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Rick Vermeers. He is one of the team leaders for the election integrity team. We've been working, the election integrity team has been working since 2020?
I think it was well before that,
Yeah.
because Tom Tanger led it before Tom
Okay.
Anderson did.
Okay, so maybe 2016?
Probably right around there.
Yeah, about 2016. Basically looking into our voting system here in Clark County and the state. And so he has a presentation for us, just to let you know. I've also been working on this team as much as I can for the last 4 years, so I have actually had personal experience with this. So anyway, I will let Rick go ahead.
Okay. So, I'm,
Microphone.
thank you. I'm a certified election observer, certified by Clark County, and I've been doing it since 2021. Right now, I'm also interim leader of the Republican Party Election Integrity Team Group, the person that led it prior. More that way.
Yeah, a little bit more. There you go. There you go. You're good.
Is pulling back. His wife has some health issues. I do all the scheduling for all the Republican observers for elections. My background's in electrical engineering from WSU, and I was a long-term volunteer for the Sheriff's Department in Spokane, so one of my passions is law enforcement. So I'm here to tell you that I have really high confidence in the tabulation of votes in Clark County. And those of you who were here for the Kimsey presentation last time, I think the staff is doing a great job. And just to talk a little bit more in detail about that, during the recount of the Commissioner of Public Lands race, Rich Cooper, who as of tomorrow will be the new manager of the elections office in Clark County, conducted the whole thing, and he just did an outstanding job. He laid out the room so that all observers could get up close and personal with the ballots as they were being recounted. Any ballot that had a change in it, let's say they changed from one candidate to the other candidate, those are always crossed out, and he laid all those out for us to see individually, one by one, as we watched. So it was just excellent transparency. We were able to compare the paper ballot with the scanned image, and the scanned image is what is actually counted during an election for every single one that came up in question, and that was just awesome. We could go into the back room. The ballots have a barcode on them, and you can go to the scanned image and compare the scanned image to the barcode, which is outstanding. Some counties do not do that, which can cause problems, and that barcode is not tied to the voter. There's a barcode on the envelope and a barcode on the ballot, and once it leaves that envelope, nobody can tell who voted that way. But it's really important to be able to go back and look at the ballot when there's any kind of an issue in the scanning system. So it was just really well done. Reasons for the differences in the count: people would blacken in the initial person that they wanted to vote for, and then they would go over to the right and they'd cross out that name and blacken in the second person. Well, the scanner can't pick up the cross out. So it doesn't know. So once in a while, when they do resolution, and they're looking at these that have got two, they will make the incorrect decision, because if you cross that name out in pencil, it may not show up on the scanner. So one other thing that they've done is now, when they are going through and looking at the resolution, and we can watch that through a window, they will put the ballot up to the window to show us what the situation is with the ballot, and then they will select the proper person to vote for. And that's a change that Rich made after the Department of Natural Resources election. So that process was key in improving accuracy. So another thing that happened, there was a missed batch of ballots during the November election, and it was towards the end of the election. And there were two really close races, the 18th legislative district and the county 4th district. So you can imagine everybody's going, okay, so there's a missed batch. How many ballots are for one candidate or the other? And is this going to be a problem? Is this going to hit the newspapers? So what Rich did is he called us. He called the Republican group, the Democrat group, and the League of Women Voters group, said, come on down, I want you to take a look at this. So we went down there. He took all the ballots and fanned them out and thumbed through them so that we could see that it was a normal voting pattern. It wasn't all for one candidate or the other candidate. And we all can tell what a normal voting pattern is, because we see them all the time. So then, because of the barcode that I explained earlier, the machine will not let you count a ballot twice. So if he puts that batch in and the machine rejects them all, he knows that he's got a bigger problem, because they were already counted. And the way he found it was, he went through the log of all the ballot batches that went through before that day. And that's another thing that he does that hasn't really been done much in the past. He's just an excellent guy.
Question?
Yes,
How many votes were in that batch approximately, and did it change any outcomes?
about 200, and there was no change in the outcome. Well, I guess I could say there was no change in the outcome because they never been counted. And what happened was, the last batch that was done on whatever day they were scanned, the person scanned them and then walked away to do something else, and the machine timed out so they didn't get recorded. Yes?
I was kind of curious if they had anything to do with the theft of the ballot box.
No, nothing. Nothing. And I can, just since you asked, I'll mention how that was done. They took the ballots from the ballot boxes and they spread them out on tables and they dried them, and they went through and they got probably 70% of the ballots. They could get votes, not all the votes off of some, but many of the votes off of them. So he went the extra mile in that situation as well. So this is the not so good news, ballot curing. And what ballot curing is after you voted, they check your signature to make sure that it matches what's on the registration or what's on your license. If that doesn't match, then they pull that ballot and don't count it. They will send you a letter saying you need to come in and cure your ballot, which means you can come in, you can change, you can do your signature, they can check it out. So that's one thing they do. So you You can do it by visiting the elections office. You can do it by sending a signature update form to the office, which is not as good as coming in, because you could, let's say somebody forged your signature, you can fill out that signature update form with the forged signature, and then it's recorded permanently as that person. So that person then can vote your ballot from that point on. The really sore point is now the legislature has said, well, we want more ballots cured. So how can we make it easier for people to cure their ballots? Well, we're going to let them call in and cure their ballots. And you're going, well, see, how do I call in and cover my signature? Well, you don't. If you've got the driver's license number, if you got your driver's license number, you can call in and say, yeah, this is who I am, and they have a record of the driver's license number, so they can do that. And you can say, yeah, I voted on November 4th, and they can check that out, and then they will allow your ballot to be counted. So here's the nefarious part. Let's say I live in an assisted living place, and the ballot comes to me and it's laying on the table somewhere, and believe it or not, people are paid to go in and collect ballots. So they can go in, they can collect that ballot. They've got access to all kinds of stuff in your living area. They can get your driver's license, they can take their phone, they can take a picture of it, and then they can vote that ballot and sign it whatever way they want to, because the signature doesn't matter at that point. Then they can call, they can go into vote.gov and they can say, yep, that was rejected yesterday. I'll just call into the office and tell them I'm Joe Smith and I can have my ballot counted, even though it isn't for the person who was supposed to do it. So, and you'll say, well, does that ever happen? Well, we don't know if it's ever happened in Washington, but we know it's happened in Texas. We've seen news stories of that sort of thing happening. And oh, by the way, King County is using Omniballot, which is put together by one party and circulated to people in that party, and they use that to cure ballots too. There's a lawsuit on that. Okay, registration by non-U.S. citizens. That's a big one for me. Registration can be done at the Department of Licensing, and all that they need when they register for their driver's license is there's a checkbox. The checkbox is, do I want to register as a voter? And there are hundreds of those that get registered because sometimes the people do not speak English. So they check the box, which attests that they're citizens, but they may not really be citizens. We also have an example of a person who was a non-citizen that voted 28 times in Clark County in the early 2000s. We uncovered that because we sent a public document request to the elections office and said, tell us all the people who were non-citizens that have tried to vote over this certain period of time. And bingo, this one popped up. So I followed that through the sheriff's department to the prosecuting attorney's office, was already to sit in the courtroom, and guess what? The prosecutor declined to prosecute and would not give a reason. And I've asked multiple times. So voter fraud, the maximum penalty is 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. So that person avoided any prosecution. The problem that we have in this state is that people who commit voter fraud are able to get out of it by saying, I didn't intend to commit it, because there is a hurdle there that says there has to be intent in order for us to prosecute voter fraud. So literally since 1999, there's been one case that has actually gone to court as a result of that. No non-citizen has been prosecuted in Clark County. Okay, so registration by non-Washington citizens. There is no longer a 30-day requirement to register to vote in the state of Washington. That was the federal government sued the state and said that does not fit with federal law, so you have to get rid of that law, and it's in the Washington Constitution. So now people can literally drive across the river, register, and vote all in the same day.
But you need an address.
Yes, you do need an address. You need to have a valid address.
So they're using two different addresses?
That's been known to happen. Okay, so there's no requirement to deregister in the previous state. It is not illegal to be registered in multiple states. It's only illegal to vote in several states.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of a hole there. ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, is used by 24 states, and it is supposed to stop people from registering and or voting in multiple states. We have found that it is not reliable. We've found multiple cases where people are registered in 2 states and in some cases voted in 2 states.
Rick,
Yes.
I mean, I think it's more malignant than that. I understand from researching this that it actually started in Washington State with the leftist.
It did.
And so what happens is, it's like the Inflation Reduction Act, which does exactly the opposite of what it says, and so it's supposed to remove double registrations. In fact, what happens when you send it in, they typically just stonewall, and they don't act on it, and then they inflate the voter rolls right before the election, and then they pull them back out afterwards, so they have all this big pool of votes that they can use for fraudulent ballots.
Yeah, we've
So a
seen
lot of
that
states have left
statistically.
ERIC. Most of the red states have left ERIC now that they found out about that.
Yeah, that is true. So in Washington State, for several years now, we have forwarded ballots to out-of-state addresses. So if you move to Idaho, for example, and you put in a forwarding address with the Postal Service, your Washington ballot will get forwarded to Idaho. And they get forwarded to all kinds of places, including internationally. So in the last election, November election, 3,000 ballots were returned to the elections office. The people did not live in those houses anymore. And so you, the taxpayer, paid for 3,000 ballots to get mailed out, and all of the work that it took to get ready to send those out, including printing. So, and these are just the ones that didn't leave a forwarding address. So who knows how many of those got forwarded out of the state and voted. You can't tell. Voters who fill out a change of address form get a ballot forwarded. So that's just a slam dunk Just one more hole in the system. Okay, deceased voters. Jessica Walker, that was the first fraud case that was prosecuted since 1999. She was a Portland resident. She voted her deceased mother's ballot. She admitted it to the sheriff's office. The sheriff recommended felony prosecution for voter fraud. It went to court, and remember, it's a 5-year, $10,000 fine. She got 30 days of community service. Completely let off the hook. So she was a Portland resident voting her dead mother's ballot in a Washington election. So the conclusion there is that there is no deterrent for voter fraud in the state of Washington.
Rick?
Yes.
So I had worked on a few of those before the election, not ballots necessarily being voted, but searching for dead people. And in the neighborhood here, I found a lady whose parents were both deceased. Her father had been dead for 2 years, and her mother had been dead for 6 months, and she'd been getting her father's ballots for that 2-year period and her mother's, and she'd been constantly contacting the elections office saying they're deceased, please stop sending the ballots. And I don't know if she ever got them. I, of course, filled out an affidavit on her behalf. So that was one case. In another case here, not of a dead person voting, but one of our over 90-year-old residents here had a daughter whose ballot was kicked back because the signature didn't match. And so I was able to call the daughter. She goes, well, I haven't lived in Washington for over 2 years. But her ballot had been sent to her mother's address. Somebody, I mean, I don't know who was in the household that got a hold of her ballot at her mother's address. They tried to vote that ballot. Now, fortunately, the signature didn't match. And I went down to the elections department and met that fellow you're talking about, and he goes, well, yeah, that doesn't match at all. I said, well, this lady hasn't lived here for over 2 years. Why is she even getting a ballot at her mother's address when she has, you know, she lived in Colorado and then Portland, and she hadn't even been in one place in all that time. So that was just this neighborhood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are lots of them.
Yeah.
Lots of them. So I've got a list here. We've been keeping track over the last 2 years. There are 158 voter challenges in here that the EI team is either pursuing now or has pursued in the past. 3 of them are deceased voters. So our folks are using their own time and their own resources to go out and try to handle this. Yeah.
And then, does Mr. Kimsey know about this?
Well, I told him when he was here the other day.
He has, once a voter challenge is made, he has to hold a hearing and decide whether the challenge is valid or not. So
And
he
does
does
he?
know.
Does he move forward and?
Yes, yeah. So all the ones that we challenge, all the ones that we put towards him, he takes care of. But he is less than diligent in finding them himself. Yes.
What was the rationale for the prosecutor not going forward with the case that you just mentioned?
They would not say. He refused to say. I wrote to him several times and absolutely refused to say.
That's really unacceptable.
Okay, so from the November election, 1,871 ballots where the signature didn't match. That's an amazing number.
Is that Clark County or the state?
Clark County.
Clark County.
And it comes directly from the statistics in the county. Yes?
Have they made any progress on that ballot box we have here by,
the burned up box.
Local one.
No suspects have been identified. However, they are putting upgraded fire suppression units in, and they've got another communication system that they're putting in, and they're also looking at cameras.
So what?
Cameras.
I saw the camera situation and it was hours
I know
before
there are
the fire
cameras.
department
Yeah.
showed up.
So that one had cameras, but they're looking into deploying cameras to every single ballot box in the county. And they'll be higher quality, so you'll be able to see more. So, 37 of those were referred to the sheriff. 10 of them admitted that somebody other than the voter signed it. So now you have an admission, but all they have to do is say, well, I really didn't know what I was doing, I just signed the envelope. Can't be prosecuted for voter fraud. So one of the things that I've been pushing is to prosecute them for forgery as opposed to voter fraud, because there's no such rule. One voter attempted to vote in another state, that's just the one they caught. One spouse voted in deceased voter's envelope, so it happens. It just happened in this last election. 9 voters tried to vote after moving out of state. Huh. Imagine that. Forwarded ballot. One non-citizen from another country tried to register. And just a footnote, when we go after them, we don't care what party they're in. We try to have them prosecuted no matter who they are. Go ahead.
And then the sheriff, is he being responsive to the 37?
Yes, the sheriff does a really good job of investigating, and I feel so sorry for them because they put in hours and hours and hours forwarded to the prosecution and nothing happens. Like I said, one since 1999. So just a question for the group. Yeah, go ahead.
So can I ask a question? I'm an election observer also, and you mentioned that the 1,800 signatures didn't match. Sometimes, I mean, that's not necessarily a problem, it's actually a good part of the system to catch things. One of the problems that I see is if you track people's signature over time, people that all are in, like me, I write sloppy. My signature is almost indecipherable. So that is maybe a false sense there's a problem with the signature match, where actually signature match helps the integrity of the system. Would you agree to that?
I would agree that having a signature match improves the integrity of the system, but the number of those is alarming. And the problem is you can't tell which ones are just because they may have become older or they changed their signatures, or if they're being forged by somebody else. I can't tell you what that is, but the fact is that there are that many, and we know from what I just showed up there that some of those are frauds.
Yeah. But also some of it is limitations of the software system.
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know how relevant this is, but when I was an election observer, I found that every signature that I thought did not match was thrown out. I mean, the people were working really hard for accuracy. But I saw all kinds of signatures accepted that I thought, you're kidding me. These are not even close. How are they being accepted? So I guess my question is, how can you ever have a system like that and be sure those people are, you know?
You really can't be 100% sure, no question about that. So if you didn't like it then, you'll really not like it now, because there was a lawsuit in Yakima County that said that a disproportionate number of Hispanic and natives were being rejected. So they said, now we've got to put together a system where we can check that out. So what they've done is they've loosened up on the system, so more of them passed, because during the election, they have to go through and do an audit on all the ones that were rejected. And it's a great way to always meet your audit statistics if all those rejected are so obvious that there isn't even any question. So, and I agree with you, I have the same issue. I see ones that have been accepted that shouldn't be. And in answer to your question about the aged, those are the ones that really fly through because they look at your birth date, and if you're 65 years or older, that signature is very likely to pass. And that's my opinion from being an observer. So, what margin is needed to win an election? And this is not a trick question. How many votes? One vote. Okay. What is the definition of widespread voter fraud? That's a really hard one because is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 500 votes that would tip that over? I hear it over and over again, and it really drives me crazy. Widespread voter fraud, they say, well, there is no widespread voter fraud. Well, I can tell you from the statistics I just showed that there is voter fraud. I just don't know if it's widespread voter fraud. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know you were talking about the results of the ballot counting. I guess one of the things we found out when we were canvassing about new potential fraud before the election is the idea that basically if you know somebody's name and birthday, you can cancel their vote and print a new ballot and vote it yourself. And so, and you wouldn't even know. And so, I mean, you familiar with that?
Yeah, well, right back to the example that I used about ballot curing.
Yeah.
Once you have the person's driver's license, now you can have that ballot sent to you from now on. Now, you'd probably get caught if you had 20 of them sent to the same address, but who knows? And I'm not saying that I have evidence of that happening. I'm just pointing out that it's a hole in the system. And as soon as there's a hole in the system, somebody finds a way to go through that hole.
We know from experience is that the Dems are always finding new ways to cheat. You know, if we plug a pounding down to Gophers, right? And so it seems like this is a new potential one. You find a Republican neighborhood and you're Dem operative, you just would go and cancel votes from everybody in the House once they voted and then re-vote yourself for the people you want. So I don't know how, anyway.
Yeah.
So, one, I am a Democrat and election observer, and I'm not aware, for the 10 years I've been around here, of any Democratic efforts to skew the election. But the question I have, you mentioned, I believe, that some people are paid to chase ballots. So, one, I'm just questioning if that necessarily is a bad thing, but also, as a Democrat, that's never happened in my experience. So do you know of a particular party or county that there are people paid to chase ballots? I just don't know of any.
Not in this county.
Do you know elsewhere in the state?
Texas.
Yeah, but not in this state.
No, not in this state. I have no evidence of that.
Just want to clarify.
I'm just saying that it's possible.
And some of the ballots that are mailed out of state, aren't those going to military folks that are posted abroad? Shouldn't they vote?
And children that are of voting age, that are in colleges, that's legitimate. That is absolutely legitimate. But as in the statistics here, we saw people who had their ballots mailed out of state voted. And again, it only takes one vote to change an election. So we should do everything we can to make sure every person's vote counts and the people who shouldn't be voting don't get to vote.
So, can I ask a question here, Phil?
Sure.
The policy in the state, I've talked to Greg Kinsey about this, it's not his policy, he follows the law. Policy is to encourage people to vote, make it easy to vote, and increase the number of people who participate democratically in our process. So, to some extent, that may be counterbalanced to the fact that it's so isn't how do you look at that balance of, don't we want more people to participate in the process and vote legitimately?
Could you repeat his question?
Yeah.
We
So,
can't hear.
Sorry.
So he asked, the question is around encouraging people to vote. So don't you want everybody to get a chance to vote? I agree with that 100%. You want everybody to get a chance to vote. But when the legislature passes laws, they pass laws based on the advice of maybe one person or two people. They don't look at all the permutations that might happen because of what they just passed. And the ballot curing is one of them. They just made a bigger hole for ballot curing, which I object to. Yes?
When somebody passes away, there's usually a death certificate. Can't hear you. What?
Here.
No. You have to keep that up there.
Okay.
That's a different microphone.
Oh, okay.
When someone passes away, there's a death certificate issued, usually in the county, I believe. And why does the county remove them from the registration then, or not? When my husband passed away, I kept getting ballots for a couple of years. I finally called, and they said, well, the next time you get a ballot, write deceased on it and mail it back. And I thought, oh, I can go get everybody's ballots out of their mailbox and write deceased, and nobody in my neighborhood would be voting. So,
Just one more hole in the system, and it is not, they do not have consistent ways of checking every death in the county. But if there's a death certificate issued, then they should be canceled. And that is the work of the elections department to do that.
Yeah, one of the things I found when I had been given a list of potentially dead people, several of them were in assisted living homes. And so I would go to the director of the assisted living home and go through the list and like, oh yeah, these 5 people have been dead for a long time. But they're still getting ballots there. So I have no way of knowing if those ballots, they've been getting them, and so there was no, but I don't know. So how do you get those people's, of course, I filled out affidavits saying that they were gone, but it happened at several assisted living homes, so.
It happens frequently, and there's no really good method to do it except what you did.
Another thing, Rick, I know that we did a lot of work, I think several of us working on the ballot rolls for a couple of years, and we gave all that information to Greg Kimsey. That was about a couple of years ago. What was done with all that information?
So that all went through the process that I explained earlier, the voter challenges, and it's whoever is doing that voter challenge has to mail them a certified mail letter, and they go through this whole process. So we, as observers, actually are paying for the certified mail to go to the people so that we have evidence that it was returned and there was nobody there. But and then Greg goes through and tries to contact the people to have them show up for the hearing. So some of them actually show up. They show up and you go, oh, well, we thought they passed away, or we thought they'd moved from that address, but they didn't. So it's not, nothing that we are doing is perfect, but every little bit helps.
What percentage of the homeless are actually voting, and how are they voting in Vancouver?
We don't know that. And that's another issue. The legislature said that people can live at a non-traditional address going forward. So you have to have an address where your your ballot is mailed, what's going on there? They called my watch, not my phone. So, they have to be able to get their ballot. They can vote, but we have no idea. We are looking at non-traditional addresses, and that's another thing that we have to move through. But it's very, very tough to get any of those canceled if they are not legitimate. Yeah.
So you've complicated Rich Cooper, who's a great guy. I also like the Kathy Garber, who's just retiring. She was awarded as she was awarded, I guess, as the state election official of the year this past year. What is your assessment of Greg Kimsey and the job he's doing in this election process?
I think Greg does everything that is legally required of him, but not much more.
Another question.
Well, it's just more of an observation, which is, you hear this, make it easier to vote.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is making it easier to cheat and fraud. And that's the whole point. And as long as you have mail-in ballots, it's going to be shoveling sand against the tide to stop the fraud. And that's the whole point. And in close elections, you don't need that many votes to switch things. And that's where most of this fraud occurs. And I mean, most of us grew up going to a polling station. Most of us, I had to produce or my family, my mother did, produce a birth certificate just to get a driver's license.
Yeah.
And this didn't seem to be too much of a burden. But of course, if you're a non-citizen, and a lot of folks think if you live here, you have the right to vote here, whether you came from Guatemala or, King County. And I think that's really where if there's going to be any reformation, we're going to have to get back to a system where it is designed to see that people who vote have the legal right to vote, and not just because they live here. And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I cannot disagree with you. Okay, other questions?
On voting day, I stopped by the auditor's office, and there was a line all the way down from the auditor's office, all the way down to the courthouse. It was really long. And I assume those people were there to register to vote and vote, because why would they be, so what was going, do you have any idea what was going on with the people in that line?
It was both, as you suggest, both registering and voting. I would say a rather small percentage were there to register,
Okay.
but there were a lot of people there to vote. And kind of comically, a lot of people believe, as I do, that you should vote in person. So a whole bunch of people threw out their ballots and went down there to vote in person.
Oh.
So they had to be issued new ballots. Some of them actually carried their ballots down and said, I want to vote in person. And they had to be told, yeah, take the ballot out of the envelope and vote in person.
Oh.
But they also had a little situation where they heard that at WSU they were allowing people to vote. So they bolted the line and went up there, and there were like 400 people that showed up at WSU Vancouver. So.
Oh.
And some of them wanted to register instead of vote, so they showed up and they were really ticked off that they drove all the way up there and couldn't register.
Oh, man. Huh.
So, other questions? All right, well, so if anyone is interested in observer training, Rich has gone back to live observer training. You can go online to the elections department. They will set up a time for you to be trained, and we'd be happy to have you. I'm sure the other groups, League of Women Voters and Democrats, would be happy to have you as well.
Well, also talk to them about opportunities to help on the Clark County Election Integrity Team. What are the various things you're doing on the Clark County Election Integrity Team?
Well, you've heard about most of it today. We do a lot of work on trying to track down illegal voters or voters who have moved out of state. But we have, every Thursday, the third Thursday of every month, we have a meeting and we just get together and talk about strategies for taking care of this. And it's at the elections office, or not the elections office, at the Republican Party office in town. So you can look up that address.
One thing you didn't talk about today was the, I don't know what you would call it, where people didn't know that we're donating money through Act Blue. Remember
Yeah, that's,
what's that called?
well, what it was, Act Blue, and the thought is that there's some money laundering going on there. That's a federal issue, so I tried to stay with the state issues.
Oh, okay.
But in Clark County, if you looked at the Act Blue group and looked at the donations that people made from Clark County, people made donations way in excess of what they claimed they did when they were contacted. And that's being investigated on the federal level. So I don't know that anything illegal is going on there, but I know that the records that they keep move daily, even on past elections. So if you look at the 2020 elections, the data on who contributed and how much they contributed moves daily. And we've been tracking it. Yeah.
Can you go back just a moment and is it a bipartisan group of people that are part of the Clark County, if I'm saying this correctly, integrity team?
It is the Republican Clark County Integrity Election Group that I represent. It is not bipartisan. But when we look for people who are breaking the law, we have no regard to party. If we find out they're breaking the law, we'll turn them in whether they're Republicans or not.
Is there anything looking to the future that it would be advantageous to make it bipartisan?
Well, there is the Washington Voter Research Project, which is a bipartisan group by definition, but it's primarily made up of Republicans.
What's the name of that group?
Washington Voter Research Project.
Thank you.
With the legislature starting up next week,
We can't hear you.
with the legislature starting up next week, with respect to some of the issues you've brought up today, are there any legislators backing changes that you recommend or other changes dealing with the election process?
Yes, I've talked to John Lee in the 18th, and there's a group that's going to be talking to Kevin Waters in the 17th on Thursday. Yes?
I had a question about, I think it was the prior election where kids that were in a different state from where they lived because they were going to college, and there was voting irregularity, I believe, in that one. And I was wondering, is that being tracked at all?
That, I'm familiar with the situation, but I'm not familiar with any charges that there was illegal voting going on.
I just wondered if it was blocked at all.
We look at everything, so if it was in another state and they're going to college, we'll look at it, but as soon as we find out that they're an 18-year-old and their address is a dorm at such and such a college, we just don't worry about that. Anything else? All right, well, thank you for your attendance today.